You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your hosts, Thomas Ahrens and Jared Mounts. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you jacked up, I don't know what will.
I have the pleasure, long story short, I got to meet Alex. You guys remember him from our last episode at the Richmond Fishing Expo, and we got to talking and brainstorming. And I'm going to say, like, this was completely your idea to actually get this together. I'm going to give you full credit to get me down here and actually to do a deep dive on one particular topic that we're going to get into, which is the Alabama bass issue in Virginia. And then also just a little bit of background on this guy right here, who you said I have got to talk to. So Michael Benarski, thank you so much for meeting us. And really, like, we were already talking about this before we started recording. What got you into this? I know you want to become a bass master, and then now you're here.
Well, that's what's crazy. My background's a little unique for somebody in this field. So when I was a teenager, I wanted to be a professional bass fisherman. When I started to get into college, I wanted to be a professional bass fisherman. I was fishing every chance I could. Any day I could get out there, I would get out there fishing 100, 150 days a year, fishing tournaments every weekend. And when I was in college, I got some really useful guidance about, career opportunities that were present. I always like to joke that I was good at math. So I got some really good advice to get into this field in that direction. And that's what I did. And I realized that there's a lot of things you can accomplish if you've got the background and the understanding as an angler. So I've gone from being the person at the meetings complaining about the regulations to being the person that is now presenting regulations to the board and trying to make sure that what we do really represents the interests of the anglers, looking at it from that perspective. And I actually think it's given me a unique perspective. That being said, I still watch the Bassmaster Classic, and I'm very excited to see who's going to come in with 28 pounds of fish and completely upset the top 5 standings in the final day. I still get a big thrill out of watching that.
Was this a college advisor that pushed you in that direction? Was it a family member?
This was in college. So as I was going through there, I got some really great mentorship early on in my college career, being able to get into fisheries management without the proper prerequisites. And when I started doing fish management, it all kind of gelled. So watching the intersection between the environment, the people, and then the regulatory framework really made a lot of sense. And it was kind of an epiphany. And at that point, I tried to make sure that the coursework that I enrolled in was more relevant to pursuing a career here. And actually, prior to coming down here, I worked extensively as a scientist. So my background's actually more quantitative analysis, running numbers.
So that was so you got a major and a minor then, and it was minor.
So I have a PhD in fisheries management from the University of Georgia. And my background there was working with what you'd call population dynamics, understanding the processes that drive fish reproduction, fish survival, and ultimately fish abundance. And then kind of parlaying that into working with species as varied as sturgeon, black sea bass, summer flounder, bluefish, weakfish, scup, tautog. One of my favorite studies actually is we were able to do work looking at rod and reel sampling for tautog in Massachusetts, recognizing that the surveys that we had in place didn't adequately capture tautog, which are a structure-oriented fish, because the surveys were off a structure. So looking at angling is actually a really great tool. And that's only something that kind of kicks around in my mind, is how that angling perspective can really inform not only the policy recommendations, but also the science. I think there's a direct linkage for anglers to get involved with the science and contribute as citizen scientists.
How does that help you, having that bass background, like you said, going into that specifically about tog and understanding that, they're more structure oriented? Like, how does that help you view things that different people? So if you're looking at a portrait, do you view it a little bit differently because of your tournament background?
I think I do. It's very difficult to disentangle being an angler from everything that I do. So
it's not a bad thing.
It's challenging because a lot of the stuff is very personal in terms of, the stuff. I lose a lot of sleep over some of the resource issues that we have. I genuinely get concerned about how we're going to be able to do the right thing or the correct thing, given the different perspectives and things that are out there on the table. I mean, I lost a lot of sleep over Alabama bass, which is one of the things that, I know we're going to talk to extensively. Oh, yeah. Because, there was a time I fished for them in their native range when I lived in Georgia. I look at it from the perspective of, though they could be entertaining to catch, we're also jeopardizing the largemouth bass resource. So to me, that's a personal thing, because I still spend my weekends out there bass fishing. I get recognized. I go to Lake Chesdin all the time. I get recognized. I'm not going to tell anybody what color my boat is, but I get seen out there. So this is always factoring into how I look at everything. So it provides a bit of a drive to try to find these solutions and try to look at it. It also provides an awful lot of understanding about the user base, and is a big reason why I do things. I spend a lot of time on fishing forums. I spend a lot of time reading some of the fishing magazines that are out there. I think I've got a copy of In Fisherman and Bass Times on my desk right now.
I usually cycle to my desk after.
I usually put them on Alex's desk. And while those magazines are not as useful from understanding the nuances of catch curve residual analysis to look at environmental impacts of flow on fish reproduction, they're extraordinarily useful in determining what anglers are thinking about things. Getting back to the people are a big part of managing a fishery resource, and it's critically important to understand that. On the other hand, it also means I end up with whatever new spinning reel one of the companies has come out with, thinking that's a great idea as I see the advertisement, and then putting it to go along with the other 18 spinning reels that are in the boat. So it's a bit of a different perspective. It's something that, though I will say, really drives me and really kind of gives me a personal connection and kind of a personal objective with a lot of the stuff that we try to do, because I'm ultimately looking at how we can maximize recreational opportunity and maintain sustainable fisheries.
How has your views changed when you were winning state tournaments as a youngster and thinking about what DWR does, and now you're here?
I'll tell you, Thomas, the biggest transition has been understanding just how complex the situations we face are. It's human nature to look at things and think that there's only a couple of things going on. And a lot of times, as an angler, I was very focused on very specific issues, whether it was the availability of vegetation, whether it was the nuances and appropriateness of fishing for spawning bass. And the truth of the matter is there's 18 or 20 different things that influence fisheries management. And a lot of times we're faced with what I consider bad and worse options. There's a lot of circumstances where there is no clear path. And trying to do the right thing, a great example of that would be dealing with some of the circumstances beyond our control. We know that flow availability, i.e. from rainfall, is critically important in establishing good year classes of smallmouth bass on rivers like the James. There's very little we can do about that. And trying to manage around that, look into different management actions, whether it's size or bag limits, whether it's trying to get hatcheries online to stock additional smallmouth bass, or whether it's dealing with threats such as Alabama bass that are going to further add stresses. It's not as simple as, just put a size limit in place. It's not as simple as stock more smallmouth bass. There are a dozen different things that impact this.
And I think you touched on this too. It's the human nature thing of you want to blame one thing. And so, on the Upper Potomac, it's like, well, clearly it's the Flathead's fault why we have no smallmouth. And you talked about it. It's not that we've had a couple of years of we've had poor spawning classes. It's not the water quality. It's like, it's always a death by 1,000 cuts. And we always want to blame just one thing. And it's hard. And that gets back to what you need to do when you get the message out there is like, enlightening the public of like, this is the situation on the ground, and to kill the doc talk, because the doc talk is fascinating how that can just grow out of control.
Yeah, we're trying to bridge the gap between kind of what's going on behind the scenes, the science and management of those resources, to the public with a bit of a fishing spin on it. And the smallmouth thing is definitely a concern for us, and Alabama bass are sort of an added stressor to that, multitude of negative impacts that are occurring and having a sort of an aggregated impact on the fishery. But high flows in the springtime, like Mike was saying, you maybe easier to deal with 1 or 2 bad years, but when you have 4 or 5 high water years in the middle of May compounded on top of each other, then you have 4 or 5 basically year classes that are missing. And then all of a sudden, where are all the fish is kind of the deal there. So, but yeah, it's just a abundance of issues kind of compounding on top of each other. So one of the big things for us is just preventing the spread of a species that might have a real impact from a genetic standpoint with smallmouth bass.
Yeah, let's set the table about that, because I heard the rumors. I've heard the rumors. I've seen it on social media a little bit, and then we got to talking about the Alabama bass situation, and then I did a deeper dive, and then getting into our main topic of today. When set the table of the background of this issue, when did you guys see it on the horizon? Where are we today from like point of origin? and then like what can be done.
Yeah. So, what year was the fish? Did the fish first show up at Clater, Mike? Was that
The first time we
14?
confirmed Alabama bass would have been 2017,
2017.
with the state record spotted bass that was submitted. Looking back into it, it's very clear that Alabama bass have been in Virginia since about 2008, 2009. Looking back into it, we just hadn't been doing the genetic testing. It's also important to recognize that Alabama bass weren't separated, because you had said spotted bass at one point.
And I wouldn't bring
And
that
the general public, a lot of it is going to look at these fish as spotted bass. The experts that study fish genetics, which I am not one of them, I'm more of a nuts and bolts fisheries guy. Genetics was never my strong suit, so I got to rely on the experts on this one. They split Alabama bass from spotted bass about 15 years ago. And at that time, a lot of these fish had been moved around as spotted bass. We actually got very lucky because we used to move spotted bass through Virginia, and thankfully they were spotted bass, not Alabama bass.
Back in the 70s.
Back in the 70s. Because spotted bass are actually native to the western part of the state. Alabamas are not.
Yeah.
But the Alabamas kind of came on the scene in the late 2000s. Places like Diasen Reservoir and Clater Lake. And the large, quote unquote, spotted bass are actually Alabama bass. And we first detected them with the submission of a fish for a state record spotted bass, that there were suspicions amongst us that it was a largemouth hybrid. And when it came back as an Alabama, it kind of shook us, and we were really concerned about how we managed that, and looked into some of the case studies and realized that this is probably the biggest threat that we have.
Why?
Well, the big threat that comes with an Alabama bass is you've got a real unique critter here. You've got something that can outcompete a largemouth bass. There are very few fish that can outcompete a largemouth bass. So when you see the introduction of an Alabama bass, you're very likely to lose your population of largemouth, or see it get down to a level that's only a fraction of what it was. On Lake Norman, for example, it's about a tenth of what it was prior to the introduction of Alabamas. The other big one that comes up with Alabamas, particularly given the smallmouth bass, we were talking earlier about the smallmouth bass rivers in Virginia, how it's this really great resource that we have, which it is. Alabama bass interbreed readily with just about anything but a largemouth. So when you get an Alabama bass introduced into a system with something like smallmouth bass or shoal bass or red-eye bass, as our friends in Georgia are dealing with right now, they swamp them. So they interbreed with the fish. You lose your pure strain smallmouth bass. And we've seen situations in some of the reservoirs in northern Georgia, places like Lake Chattooga, where they have lost their entire smallmouth bass population because of this, they call hybrid introgression. And
playing out in that example relatively quickly, within like 10 years.
Yeah, this is not something that happens over the span of 30 or 40 years. These declines are noted rather quickly.
I'm glad you brought that up about Georgia, because I know the shoaly bass is something that they really adore down there. Like, how much of an issue is it there, just to like take that window here and maybe see into the future what's going to happen here?
So I had mentioned earlier, I lose a lot of sleep about some of these issues. I don't think I would sleep at all if I lived in Georgia.
That bad? Because
what you've got in Georgia is
black bass capital.
Well, yeah, the black bass capital of the world. Here in Virginia, we're fortunate to have largemouth, smallmouth, and then spotted bass, all native to the western part of the state. And we've got great fisheries for largemouth and smallmouth throughout the rest of the state. In Georgia, you've got this tremendous diversity of bass that are in basically just about every river system. When I lived down there, I used to love fishing for red-eye bass in the Oconee River. You'd fish for them in what looked like brook trout water. It was very interesting.
Really?
I grew up trout fishing in small streams, and catching small bass out of the riffles and rapids was just amazing to me. But they've got that situation with things like the warrior bass, Tallapoosa bass, red-eye bass, Bartram's bass. I think they've got like 14 or 15. And, recently talking with those folks, the only two bass species in Virginia in Georgia that aren't threatened right now are basically your Swanee bass, which live in environments that aren't really hospitable to Alabama bass, and your largemouth, which, even though your largemouth decline, they don't ever get what they call extirpated or knocked out. But there's a lot of issues finding pure red-eye bass, pure shoal bass in Georgia. And they've lost a lot of their tremendous natural history, natural diversity that they have because of the spread of Alabamas.
And this is why context, I know we were talking about, and you guys know how much I hate TikTok, like in short form content, the context. And that's so important is like, this is not just something that you're seeing here. You lived it in Georgia and now you're here. And now you're like, I've seen, and I know what that's like when this happens to an ecosystem and you don't want it to happen here. And I think that's also really important that, yeah, you've seen this happen already before.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we're seeing some of the introgression already in some of our bodies of water. So if you're a smallmouth advocate, the Alabama bass situation is straight sobering. So basically, with some of the genetic results that we've done, so Mike, you can give us a background, but we ran basically a black bass genetic baseline after we had confirmation of that original fish that was submitted for state record status on Crater Lake. We wanted to get just a baseline. What are our genetics like all across the state on our black bass fisheries? And so we did an extensive amount of fin clip analysis where basically you take a thumbnail sized portion of the pelvic fin. We were working, I think, with Auburn at the time and running genetics. And basically what we ended up finding out is that we had Alabama bass in more water bodies than we had originally anticipated. And in some of these water bodies like Crater Lake, where we get the results back and we're seeing alleles from Alabama bass, spotted bass, and largemouth bass, and you're looking at basically a fish that's a mutt bass, and it's just it's got genetics from a variety of different species, which is not desirable from a management perspective. But that's what we're kind of dealing with right now. And some of these, another water body that we've seen some of the hybridization with smallmouth right now is Philpott Lake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of hybrids in Philpott.
Where's Philpott?
Yeah. So that's actually down just upriver from Bassett, Virginia, down in what we call Region 2, but it's an impoundment on the Smith River. And we've got some fish there where if you looked at basically from the lateral line up through the dorsal part of the fish, it looks just like a smallmouth bass. The lateral bars, the markings, the modeling, and then basically from the lateral line down through the ventral side of the lower side of the fish looks straight like an Alabama bass, where you're looking at the fish and it's probably a first generation hybrid or close to. But that's the kind of stuff that's really concerning because they'll continue to back cross to the point where the smallmouth genes just disappear. And we're in a scenario now where they've been introduced into situations like Diasin Reservoir, where they've spilled over, gotten down into probably from spillover down into the tidal portions of Diasin Creek and into the tidal Chickahominy River. And unfortunately, we've had genetic confirmation of pure Alabama bass in the fall line section of the James River in downtown Richmond, which is a real concern for our smallmouth population. So kind of a variety of different water bodies were showing positive Alabama bass when we did that baseline. I think we found them below Crater Lake in the New River. We've gotten them, like I mentioned, in Philpott, the tidal James, Diasin Reservoir. There's a variety of different water bodies that they've popped up in, unfortunately.
And I want to keep hitting this because I even had an issue when we first started where I wanted to catch myself on Alabama versus spot. And it's important that the spot is native to Virginia, correct?
It is in the western part.
In the western part.
Yes.
But the Alabama is not, but Dan, they look alike. And so if somebody catches one, that's something that's important, that there's no way without genetic testing you can tell the difference.
Oh, they're physically identical. We actually have the regulations in place on Alabama and spotted bass are the same. There's no size or bag limit in Virginia. If somebody catches a fish that's suspect, ideally they'll have a fin clip, but we want them to submit a picture. From our perspective, anything that we see in one of the larger reservoirs, we're going to presume is in Alabama until proven otherwise. We do have a legacy of spotted bass in a lot of our different rivers across the state, so they do show up. But from our perspective, we'd rather have a false alarm and look into it. And we've seen an awful lot of misidentified largemouth as well.
I was going to say,
largemouth are funny because they've got such variable color patterns on them. When we talk about the traits for Alabamas, Alabamas definitely have a different sheen to them than largemouth do, but it's a really bad criteria when you say they're just a little more greenish gold than greenish silver relative to the two of them. So we try to look at things that are readily identifiable, like the mouth or the broken spot pattern, or the teeth on the tongue, but you can catch largemouth that have teeth on the tongue. You can catch largemouth with a broken spot pattern. And if you spend enough time around them, we can usually tell pretty quickly, but we've had fish that have typed out as largemouth that we've been a bit concerned about, and we're glad to get the samples in.
It's just like how, because I remember when the snakehead terror really started, and then people started to kill bowfin because they thought like, well, this is the snakehead. And Erdenkirk told me the stories of that when I had him on the show about he get phone calls and like, that is not a snakehead, don't kill it. I can't believe that when you look at the spot Alabama, that's got to be even worse because of how close they look. Because if you're misidentifying a snakehead and a bowfin, oh my God, that's got to be a pain on your end for how many calls and how much you're inundated with that stuff.
You know what though? To me, so as the one who I worked with our administrative assistant to handle the initial reports of Alabama bass, and we got about from the general public, so it was a manageable number. But the thing that really spoke to me was how concerned our anglers were about it.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually really encouraged to see, even though there was a lot of false positives, I was really encouraged to see that people took it seriously enough, because when we get information out to the general public, we're always doing our best to get some attention to it. And I was really impressed with the conservation ethic of Virginia's anglers, coming up with fish that were potentially suspect, sending them to us so we could follow up. And through that work, we'd actually found fish in new bodies of water. You know, they've started to show up in Carr Reservoir. Mm-hmm. And those Carr Reservoir reports were actually reported to us by anglers prior to the time we found them doing some biological sampling.
Yeah, and you're kind of hinting at really the partnerships that we've built throughout this with our education campaign on this. Obviously coming out with new regulations, illegal to have live possession of Alabama bass outside of the body of water of catch. But then we really pushed into an education campaign. And it's a great example of how our agency has partnered with basically the bass fishing community and bass fishing organizations like the Bass Angler Sportsman Society, the Bass Federation, the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame. We actually all went in on a grant together to develop educational materials to kind of get this campaign out there. So we extensively handed out pamphlets and fin clip envelopes to TBF and BASS tournaments all across the state. And we're trying to get the word out for folks to kind of look for suspect spotted bass or Alabama bass in new bodies of water. So trying to have the bass fishing community be additional eyes in the field on top of our sampling, which is proven to be successful in identifying some new populations and other water bodies.
And I'm overly optimistic. I'm overall fairly optimistic with the response we've gotten from the bass fishing community. You know, I'm reminded of the catch and release movement that was really pioneered by the bass fishermen, who were really concerned about the sustainability of the resource. And to me, this fits in as a conservation value, i.e. don't move fish. And it's been really wonderful to see that level of enthusiasm. It reminds me of the catch and release movement. And they've been fantastic partners. You know, to build on that further, you know, the thing that really pulled all of this together and actually helped to set a lot of our internal discussions was a meeting at the BASS Conservation Summit.
Really?
In Birmingham, Alabama, at the classic that they had down there. Because they had brought...
What year was that?
Oh, I'm trying to... This was right at the beginning.
I
remember driving back and hearing on the radio about this new virus that was spreading. Yeah. I distinctly remember being a bit concerned that I spent that much time in a convention center as this was unfolding, and then getting the reports of a bad flu that was circulating. I remember that distinctly. But, you know, at that meeting, they had brought on the conservation director for the North Carolina Bass Nation, by a guy by the name of Bill Frazier, who had brought in and worked with some of the biologists in North Carolina. And I remember challenging the folks there, of saying if they were willing to provide some backing on this, that this is a giant threat. And if they're willing to work together with us, I think we can make a lot happen. And I've been delighted by the enthusiasm that's come through, having been at a lot of bass club meetings and seeing things like usage of nets being very contentious. I was very delighted to see that strong conservation ethic come through and the solid support, to the point where, as Alex was saying, we were distributing envelopes, posters. We had a Bassmaster Open out here on the James, and anglers were excited to bring in potential Alabama bass to be killed for further analysis. I never thought I'd see that day where a tournament bass fisherman would be excited about potentially killing a bass. But they're so concerned about the long-term sustainability of the bass populations we have with largemouth and smallmouth, that I think they truly believe in doing the right thing for those resources.
How much communication do you guys have when the bass with bass? Like you talked about the summit and the bass opens to come to the James River for the last 300 years. It feels like they've been going there. Like, do you guys have a lot of communication, or do they have to reach out to you if they want to hold a tournament? Like, how does all that work?
So the tournaments are not permitted in Virginia. Access sites are permitted. So it's one of those things we try to minimize regulations and regulatory burden on it. So that's kind of independent of it. It's more of leveraging the joint interests and joint partnerships. So we are always in close contact with the conservation directors from the big fishing organizations in Virginia, like TBF or BASS, as well as the national level of those organizations with support. So we're always back and forth. And our biologists stay actively involved within these communities and within these groups to help get the message out, rely on them for some supplemental sampling that can come out. And we've really been trying to build on the utility of that with helping our science. Another great example when we're talking about black bass has been some of the sampling that we've gotten with our F1 bass stocking study from the bass fishing community, that, tournament bass fishermen are just a little bit more effective at catching large bass than our electrofishing equipment is. We'll give that shout out directly to it.
Okay. You brought that up, and I just saw Hallicker's Instagram. Shout out, dude. You do really good work up where we're at. And he had this little podunk fish finder when he was dropping trees. And in my mind, it really thought about forward-facing sonar and the advances in that. Is that a tool ever that you guys could use for data collection as the technology progresses?
So it's interesting.
I know it's off the wall, but I was like,
no, it's good. It's not off the wall, because I remember when I'm starting to date myself, because I remember I remember getting excited when I had I first got a color graph on the front of my boat, and that was a big deal. And having enough resolution to watch my silver buddy, I remember that. But when side scan sonar came out, it was actually adopted by a lot of the scientific community for data collection.
Really?
Well, side scan sonar is extremely useful at delineating habitat quickly. And being able to process the data, you get an awful lot of resolution. If you're skilled with side scan sonar and can tell. So when I used to fish in New England a lot for winter smallmouth, a lot of what I would look for would be the break line between gravel and the mud in the bottom of those natural lakes, because the smallmouth in the winter would hold towards the end of those points in 39-degree water. And if you found that edge, you could work around it with a silver buddy, hair jig, or a drop shot. That type of resolution is extraordinarily useful if you're looking to rapidly go through habitat delineations, if you're looking to quantify what's in a lake. And I think it's actually been transformational in a lot of cases for building lake maps, understanding what's going on in a system from a scientific perspective. The forward-facing sonar is a little bit different. At this point, I don't see a direct application for forward-facing sonar with any sort of evaluation work that we do. Now, there has been work in the past with sonar has been used to assess forage availability in some systems.
Interesting.
That was common on some of the reservoirs in the Savannah River chain in Georgia.
Really? Where
they would do the acoustic sampling of the forage base to take a look at how that was doing overall. But on our end, we don't do those type of surveys for forage. And I don't see forward-facing sonar being directly useful at this point. That being said, our science teams come up with some really great ideas. And if presented with a really good idea at our next science team meeting, I might change that tune a little bit. But right now, there's not a direct application from the scientific side of things. What's also really interesting to watch from the forward-facing perspective is concerns about overharvest. I figured you were going in that direction, Thomas. And we've thought a lot about this, following the message forum, seeing what the chatter is about it. There certainly is concern about how much more accessible this is making fish. But from our perspective, the proper response to something like that would be to modify size and bag limits if there's a problem.
Yeah, because I know with the crappie guys, that was a big thing where they're saying, I don't know if this is correct, but now you're able to target the bigger females now. You're understanding their behaviors, especially pre-spawn now. And with forward-facing sonar getting so much better, you can almost look and like, that's a 2-pounder, that's a 1.5 pounds. You're Nintendo fishing. And yeah, it's like the way it was described to me that the limits are in place to where if every single person could limit out, there may or may not be an issue. But now if technology gets to the point that it's this insane and it's in like 5K on the front of your boat, is that something where it's like, okay, maybe at some point we do need to kind of factor in the technology, which is, again, I remember when I had my first little Lowrance LMS 5-inch and I had GPS, that was badass. And now it's like, I'm getting like 2 12-inch graphs on the front of my boat. So I can tell if this one is 12 inches or if this one's going to be my kicker. And it's just, what is that, 10 years? It's insane, the jump. And then so in another 10 years, it's almost something you have to start factoring in the future as tournaments. And there is more pressure from the, like you said, like the average angler that has the ability to acquire this information and then jump up their skill level by just purchasing better tech.
I still think it's important to look at, this is not the first go around with new technology. I remember restrictions were called for, and this predates me, with the old Lowrance green boxes when those first came out. There's been always been these moments of panic when new technology comes out there. From our perspective, we're not looking to restrict recreational opportunity. And quite honestly, if folks caught more fish, that's a good problem to have in most situations. Where it becomes not as good of a situation is if we did start to see declines in some of our fisheries independent sampling. If we were to see differences in age structure or size structure, we would then be likely to address it through size and bag limits. Again, trying to preserve recreational opportunity. From our perspective, we want to minimize restrictions that we put on folks and make sure there's a good reason for it.
And what you're saying is there's really not going to be, it's not going to be a big crisis issue if everyone has forward-facing sonar.
I don't think it's going to be a big crisis issue. And again, with some of the harvest-oriented fisheries, there's a bit more pressure on it, but most of our anglers have that strong conservation ethic. In fact, 55% of our anglers don't keep any fish. One of the biggest.
Say that again?
55% of our anglers are entirely catch and release. And there are actually a lot of our resources that would benefit from some harvest.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
How do you unwind that though? Because like I'm assuming you're talking about like bass specifically. I know like Frederick Hallerker's report dropped and I read it about bass being overpopulated. But when you spend, oh God, what was the first bass tournament? Catch and release was a thing. But like you spend 20 plus years, a good message of not just, catching and keeping, but, you want to make sure you preserve the bigger females, put them back in, and then you hardwire that in there. I know if you ever put on Instagram that you're going to fillet a bass for dinner, oh my God, the comment section, turn it off.
We actually did a piece on filleting largemouth bass.
Yeah.
For I think
how did that go?
Well, it actually went well. I admit I was biting my nails a little bit, but I think it's important to remember that transparency is a big part about what we do.
Yeah.
And if we're upfront about the reasons behind it, I think it really helps with it. Yeah. And I think we're starting to see folks keep more small largemouth bass. We certainly could use people keeping a lot more, but we're starting to see more of that understanding because that's a real big role for bass anglers to play in the conservation of their resource. And there are far worse things to do than keep a bunch of small bass.
And that transparency is how we basically approached that piece. We were actually at Amelia Lake, one of our wildlife management areas. And basically it's a bass crowded system. It is overrun with fish 12 inches and smaller. And so the thought process that we described is if you can go out and harvest some of these smaller fish, take them home, have a nice meal, free up the basically resources for the remaining population to take advantage of, and hopefully you're improving the growth rate of the largemouth bass population over time at a place like Amelia. And a lot of times we rely upon some level of harvest. And if there's no level of harvest, then our bag and size limits aren't really doing much for us.
No, the bag and size limits are really the only two tools we have that are effective at managing a fish population. So
as long as you have some level of harvest. But yeah.
Well, yeah, that's always the problem with those bass crowded systems in particular.
Yeah.
And it comes down to culture, right? Because I know, like, for example, like a walleye fishery is gonna be a little bit different with the people that follow that because it is bigger on harvesting versus, like you said, a muskie or a largemouth. So is it basically your job to change, I guess, the cultural stigma of having bass for dinner?
Well, I think we're just trying to basically provide folks with information on the opportunity, why we're advocating for harvest of smaller fish, and then the fact that this is a great way to go out and catch a few fish and bring them back home and eat them. And, even for someone like myself that grew up with that whole catch and release ethic behind it, I practice catch and release probably 90% of the time, but I do enjoy taking a fish home and filleting it and eating it, especially if I'm eating it a couple hours after it was swimming. So, it's just a matter of providing the opportunity and letting people basically make their own decision, but trying to basically get options out there for folks.
It's weird though.
Yeah.
Like if I was gonna take a walleye home, I probably wouldn't think twice about a crappie striper. It doesn't matter. But yeah, like as soon as I thought about cooking a largemouth, it was like it's that thing in your brain that just gets triggered. I don't know if it's because I tournament fish or you're taught that. And I don't even know if do they taste good? I'm assuming they do, right?
They are better than you would think. I think
Okay.
is the best way to describe it. I think they're comparable to eating bluegill or crappie.
If you're doing a fish fry, I mean, yeah.
Well, I've always, the way I've prepped them is like I would bluegill or crappie, where I take the skin off, I cut the head off, I gut them, I dredge them in egg and flour, cornmeal, fry them, and then I put a bunch of hot sauce on them.
That sounds really good.
Coleslaw, boom.
I usually just fill up on fish.
You guys need to do a cooking segment on the YouTube channel. That would be awesome.
We
I would love to see you in the kitchen.
Yeah, we have that. We have that video of one of our biologists, Eric Brittle, filleting a small largemouth and just kind of going through the process.
And then, guys, it'll be linked above my head right here if you want to actually take a look at that filleting video as well. And of course, link to everything that we talked about in the episode description as we keep going here. No, that's fat. And again, I have to bring up the panoptics and stuff because it is, wow, that's tribal. If you go to any comment section on any fishing forum or whatever, you have the people that are for it and against it. And I do think that we need to bring the concerns, but that's why I wanted to talk about the positive stuff of using that technology to maybe instead of just doing electric shock, like this technology does have positives too. And just to kind of put a little bow on that about the problems as we go forward with technology. But you're right, like technology, it's always going to advance. And every time the new technology comes, people are like, this is what's going to end the world. With the spotted bass, and the snakehead and all these other invasive species, what can people do? Because it's not like you can go out there and once they're in, you can get them out, correct?
Generally, that's the case. So if you've got an established population, you're not going to be able to remove them. But, if you catch one in a body of water where it's not supposed to be or not yet recorded, there's the possibility that that's only one of a couple. And at that point, it's extremely important to pull something like that out. So if you went to Lake Chesdin and caught an Alabama bass, pull it out of there and call us.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, Mike, if you want to touch upon our new rapid response protocol and how we've adopted that through the process.
Absolutely. What we'll do with that, if we get a report on something like that, we'll follow up. We have a specific process where we basically mobilize our resources to look at something as quickly as possible. If we get a situation where we get a report of a snakehead in a body of water where it's not occurred or not been reported, there is the chance that if we go out there and do a detailed survey, that we may catch enough of them to keep them from getting established. It's more of a Hail Mary type of situation, but there's been enough football games won on a Hail Mary play to make it worth your while.
Yeah, because like with all these species, like I think people get upset or are not, they're not aware that just because the invasive species in there, that doesn't mean that you're going to just firebomb the whole place and to get rid of it. Like that's not how any of this works.
It's not feasible to go in there and poison or drain a water body. I know that folks get concerned about things like that and ideas like that get floated around. Those ideas just aren't feasible.
On a more positive note, I did want to mention about the YouTube channel that you guys do a fishing report together, which is, how did you guys start that? Because that is awesome to watch.
Yeah, so that kind of really came about too during the early stages of the pandemic, where basically we shut down all in-person programming. And we're like, okay, we can't run programs. We can't physically get folks out to workshops and actually teach people how to fish, which is a lot of what I do. But how do we reach people virtually? And luckily at our agency, we're set up with the infrastructure. We've got different channels. We have expertise. We have videographers, photographers, marketers, content managers. We have the scientists that manage the fisheries. And how can we combine all of that expertise to kind of get the message out? And so we started trying to highlight different water bodies, different recreational opportunities, techniques and tactics for different species of fish during different times of the year, management goals, management objectives, and basically kind of started to try to get information out on a monthly basis. And so that's kind of what really stemmed some of the fishing report videos that kind of took off over the last few years on our social media channels and that live on YouTube. And we're really just trying to improve the chances of success out on the water.
You guys got good chemistry though. Like I would love to see a fish competition video between you two on the boat.
Oh, he
It depends what we're fishing for.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Trout, I'd probably give myself the
Myself,
upper hand.
I think I bass fish too much.
Yeah.
Why
We just have to get Mike fishing for something other than largemouth. And we'll be.
Because your background's in trout, right? Is that what you really grew up targeting?
So well, growing up in Baltimore, just a little ways up the road, I basically was able to kind of cut my teeth on the Gunpowder River tailwater. So below Pretty Boy Reservoir, there's 7.5 miles of the Maryland Department of Natural Resources manages that catch and release all wild trout fishery. It's actually very similar to the Smith River, which is one of the resources we have a little further south of here. But kind of growing up, really focusing on the trout stuff, but doing a good bit of striped bass, rockfish stuff on the Chesapeake Bay too. But yeah, just really being into the cold water side of things and doing a lot of fishing for wild trout, whether you're on tailwaters, spring creeks. I used to spend a lot of time up in South Central Pennsylvania. Lived there for a year.
There's so many trout streams up there.
So much limestone, lots of trout opportunities. But basically having the opportunity to move to Richmond, and any wild trout fishery is going to be about a 2-hour drive west of here. So really kind of expanding into more of the warm water opportunities. And I've been having so much fun with smallmouth, largemouth, chain pickerel, bowfin, walleye, sauger, some of these other species that if you're just focused on trout, you kind of miss out on. And that's what makes Virginia so unique, is there's so much diversity.
I mean, yeah, and we talked about that and I think it's helpful. It's like, because of DC and the reason I named the channel like the DMV is, when I would go down to college national championships in Alabama, and I'd talk about like when they fish their circuit, and like all the lakes are within 2 minutes of their house, and so they don't drive anywhere. They don't think they should commute. And I tell them like, well, what was your tournament series? It's like, well, we went to the James, the Potomac, to Smith, and like, dude, that's a lot of driving. It's like, that's normal for us, and I think that's a positive, not a negative. That if you tell somebody that you should go to like Moomaw, they're going to go because they're used to, because of usually the jobs and everything, of commuting. Yeah. And so even though Virginia is a massive state, I don't think it bothers as many people because you're so used to having to commute so much to, let's go if it's worth it. Yeah. And it's such a positive. And I was spying on your Instagram. Did you just go striper fishing recently?
So we
oh, we have to hear about this fish again.
I need to hear about it for the first time.
So we actually did a piece with WFXR, which is a local Fox affiliate station down in Roanoke. There's an outdoor reporter there, a friend of mine, George Noliff, who was doing a piece on fishing for winter rockfish in the lower Chesapeake Bay. And so we were basically down there pulling live eels under planer boards, and basically trying to target big fish. If you run into them, they're typically big this time of the year, but it's one of those high risk, high reward kind of deals where you could go out and spend a whole day and get blanked, or you could hook up with the biggest fish of the year, or the biggest fish you've caught in the last 5 years. So it's kind of a high risk, high reward kind of deal. But that's what's so cool about Virginia, again, is 2 hours in one direction, you could be on a native brook trout stream, and then 2 hours the other direction, you could be pulling eels for giant striped bass.
So what's the story? What's this fish story?
So basically, just got lucky. Had a rod go off next to me, and got to play tug of war with a big rockfish over 50 pounds, which is pretty cool.
God, that is so freaking awesome.
Yeah, pretty wild.
How much over 50 was it?
It was 56 pounds, Mike.
Almost 60.
Yeah, it was big. It was big. We're not going to round it up. It was right at 56, but yeah, good fish though.
Yeah, you're right though. If you're just in the bass world and all you do is fish tournaments, you forget like what is the state record striper? Is it? So
it depends on if you're talking saltwater or freshwater.
Ooh, okay.
So our state records would be only on inland landlocked systems like Bugs Island or any of our reservoirs. The tidal migratory striped bass that do spend some time in the freshwater portions of our tidal rivers would be basically that saltwater population, which would fall under VMRC's state record, our sister agency, the Virginia Marine Resource Commission. I think the state record striper is maybe 70. Is it 78 pounds in Virginia?
No, 78 was that New Jersey fish that used
or is
to
it
be
74 pounds is the state record? Let me look it up real quick. Hold up.
That's also interesting with the Chesapeake then. Records caught out of there, they don't count towards the Virginia state record. Is that correct?
So for something like a striped bass, that would not. But something like a blue catfish, largemouth bass, black crappie, something like that absolutely would as a freshwater species. Striped bass are a little bit different with that sea run versus the landlocked.
Okay, sorry, I was a few pounds off. This Virginia state record striped bass is 74 pounds.
Okay, Smith Mountain Lake.
No, this was actually caught on January 20th by Kerry Wolf of Bristow, Virginia. So that would have been a VMRC's record, either in the lower bay or it was off the coast of Virginia. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah, that's important too, to let people know about like where the jurisdiction ends with the Chesapeake. Yeah,
it kind of just depends on, like I was saying, is it a freshwater fish or is it one of those anadromous migratory fish?
From a license perspective, there's demarcation lines that are published within the regulation guide. So where you need a freshwater or saltwater license.
So our current inland freshwater striped bass state record is a 53-pound, 7-ounce fish from Leesville Reservoir, caught on March 16th, 2000. It's a large fish. But anyway, so yeah, pretty cool.
That's interesting. Could you hit on that again? Because I think if you aren't in the know and you go to the website and you click and you get a saltwater license, it's clearly you guys. You're the responsible for the Chesapeake Bay, because I went to the website and I clicked and I didn't read anything because my kids are yelling at me in the background and I'm just trying to get the fishing license real quick. But yeah, could you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, the demarcation lines for where you need a freshwater or saltwater license are listed in the regulation guide. It's important to check into those before you purchase a license. Although I would contend, I think you're better off to get a saltwater and a freshwater fishing license, because with the opportunities we were talking about,
you can do it
I
all.
couldn't imagine not doing one or the other. I think it's important to do both. So that's my shameless plug to get out there and do both. But from a practical perspective, those demarcation lines are published with where you need the saltwater or the freshwater license, and they're river specific.
Yeah, because like I think that is unique, that when you say Virginia and the state records and stuff, I think a lot of people don't understand. Like there's also another governing body that actually will operate a big majority of the Chesapeake. So if you're upset about like the pilchard issue or something like that, it's like, don't yell at you guys or how or who you need to talk to about that if you see an issue.
I mean, Thomas, to be honest, I have gotten phone calls yelling at me about things completely outside of our jurisdiction. Had one this morning, actually. But in all seriousness, we work hand in hand with the VMRC. I think we've got our quarterly meeting with them next week, where myself and my assistant fish chief will go meet with their chief of fish side of things, as well as his assistant fish chief, to talk about joint issues. But we stay in close contact, and if I've got a constituent calling that needs to talk to Marine Resources Commission, I'll do everything I can to make sure that they get a call back. I don't want to send them into a phone tree to try to get through. I'll find the right person and make sure they call them back, because I think it's important for us to work together on these issues. And you know what? A concerned angler is a concerned angler, and I'll do everything I can to help get them the answers they really want to get.
Because so if an Alabama bass was found in a tidal fishery connected to the Chesapeake Bay, then that would still fall under your jurisdiction, correct?
Into tidal fresh.
Into tidal fresh, okay.
Because we had gotten a report on Diason Creek, actually, and this came entirely through us. And from a Marine Resource Commission perspective, something like Alabama bass is more of an FYI than anything else, just because that would fall in as a freshwater fish, and then in tidal freshwater would fall to us. Mm-hmm. That being said, they're also familiar enough with the issue where we would get a report from them as well, and would work together to follow up on it.
Okay. Resources was the other thing that we mentioned before we hit record. When something like this comes up, and with anything, you always have a finite amount of resources. How that's got to be just a pain to just think about, with everything you guys have to deal with, whether it is, the James River and the Smith Mountain Lake, F1 stocking, or now you have this Alabama bass issue, and before it was the snakehead issue. Like how do you guys figure out how to allocate your resources properly?
So what I try to do as the head of the fisheries program is to be as efficient as possible and try to plan ahead and be proactive. So we have a strategic plan in place for the fisheries division over here. We've got several fishery management plans that spell out where the priorities lie, where they go. And we do that to make sure that we can respond appropriately with the resources we have. Because it's not a good enough answer to say, well, we're too busy to deal with something like this. Because if we get into a rapid response situation, we have to drop what we're doing, and we also have to cover everything else. but we try to be as proactive as possible. We try to plan ahead. We recognize the fact that even though we're not supported by general tax dollars, people do pay a fee into the Department of Wildlife Resources, get a fishing license. And we're very conscious about being efficient with those resources and getting the most bang for the buck that we can. So we try to plan ahead. We try to be prepared for what we can. And quite honestly, we've got some really hardworking folks, and a lot of us put in some very long weeks to get the job done if we need to.
I mean, you guys have done an absolute hell of a job. And again, this, I think we mentioned this earlier, but like the bass population right now in Virginia, it's insane how many teeners are being pulled out now. And I know the Res had a bunch that were like borderline 10. Lake Frederick yesterday, a friend of mine just pulled out a 9.7 out of Lake Frederick. You got the James. I mean, where, and I got to get this on camera. Do you think in the next like 10, 20, 30 years, do you think something close to that 12 to 16 pound range will come out of Virginia? You don't have to say where.
We're talking 12, absolutely.
Okay.
16.
I had to bring it down.
16's a much harder bridge to cross.
In your lifetime, you don't think it's going to get broken?
I think 16 is a very high threshold to beat, given the growing season that we have here in Virginia. I certainly think that, getting those 12s and 13s, I think a 14 is completely reasonable in the next 10 years.
Really?
But I think 16, everything has to come together so perfectly to beat 16 that I think that's a much taller order.
I'm going to hold you to that dollar.
I will happily pay you that dollar. If I'm wrong, I would love nothing more than to get a phone call about a 17-pound largemouth tomorrow.
I mean, like, I didn't think a dirty 30 would ever get caught at Lake Anna like this quickly. And then that already dropped. I think it was 4 weeks ago at a Sturgeon Creek, a dirty 30. A guy's dirty 30 just means like 5 fish close to or over 30 pounds.
I mean, those Smith Mountain's taking mid-20s. Chickahominy has been mid-20s into the low 30s. If you're fishing a spring tournament at Chesdin and everything is right, you're going to need 28.
Chesdin is another dark horse. Like, where did that come from? I remember fishing a youth tournament there, and if you caught like 12, that was a big deal. I'm dating myself now, but now it's like on the map. Like, what happened with that place?
It's always been pretty good. I think what happens with Chesdin is folks are getting more aware of it, because there's always a lot of pressure there coming in the springtime. You'll see a lot of out-of-state plates going there starting in I guess the disclaimer is I live 20 minutes from Lake Chesdin.
Home water.
So I spend a lot of time out there. But you'll see folks travel up from North Carolina to fish there. It's got a tremendous forage base. So the big fish are in there. And I think what we're starting to see is folks are getting better at figuring out how to catch some of those fish that may not be up on the banks. If you go to, like, at the risk of burning a technique, if you go to Chesdin in March with a suspending jerkbait, I was telling Alex, I lost a fish more than 8 pounds boat side. The year before, I lost a fish. I
still hear about it.
I lost a fish the year before on a big swim bait, just around 8 pounds up at the top part of Chesdin. Yeah, we had a trip out there where we had a fish that was almost 7 and another fish 6 dropped boat side, fishing 38-degree muddy water.
Wow.
That was crazy. That Chesdin consistently ranks as the number one fishery in what we call Region 1, which is basically Richmond east to Richmond metro area, east through the coastal plains to Virginia Beach. For an impoundment, it ranks number 1 for that preferred size largemouth bass, which is, I think, like 16, 17 inches and larger, for sheer numbers of or that abundance of those larger size fish. So it just has good size structure there, and a lot of forage, obviously, which can make fishing frustrating. Yeah, if you ride around and you look at your sonar there, you're just like,
yeah, you will have days on Chesdin that will absolutely make it look like the best body of water you've ever fished. And you'll have days on Chesdin where you think you should sell all your gear and take up golf.
Does it still have a bunch of standing timber?
There's not a lot of timber in Chesdin right now. There's a lot of stumps.
Yeah, stumps. Yeah.
There's a ton of stumps up in the top part of the lake, so it can be a bit hazardous to navigate. But the main thing at Chesdin is pretty much your water willow. The whole lake is rimmed with water willow, and there's a lot of points, a lot of rock structure in that lake to kind of pick through. There's also some vegetation, but I'm not inclined to give out the details of some of the specifics.
No GPS waypoints or anything?
You find vegetation in Chesdin, there's fish on it. We'll just leave it at that.
How much do you get out and fish now? Okay, that's got to be weird going from like, I want to be the next Kevin Van Dam to now you're this. And then like how does that?
I realistically get out about 3 times a month. And a lot of it's dependent on season. I like to fish in the winter. I actually, spend a lot of my summers actually doing things like hiking and traveling around the state because there's a lot of really great stuff to see in Virginia, and the lakes are very crowded. But come February, if it's, I always joke that rain, cold, or wind, pick one. If it's just one of those, I'm usually out there during the weekend at Chesdin, and sometimes I'll take some time off during the week and go out to Chesdin in the winter.
Yeah, I feel like you shine in water that's in air temps less than 35, water around 40.
Well, you gotta be prepared for it too. I actually wear a float jacket when I'm out there by myself in the winter.
So when you do the fishing reports, you just send him out there to figure out the pattern, and then the next day you film, or like how does?
There's been Mike's on the reservoir. Mike's on Chesdin enough that he kind of has a pretty good lay of the land and what's going on. And a lot of times, if we're trying to put content together, we'll go run 6 or 7 spots to put some stuff together. But when it comes to bass, Mike's our sort of our internal guru in that regard.
I think it's also important to recognize too that a lot of our staff are anglers.
Yeah.
If you've talked about Jason Hallaker, a guy likes the musky fish.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned Eric Brittle doing some of the bass fillet videos because Eric likes the bass fish. We've had Steve Owens do some trout work directly. Yeah. So what we really try to do is get that perspective with the fishing reports. There's a lot of jokes about all the bass fishing, et cetera, because that's what I like to do. But Alex works closely with a variety of different staff to get different species targeted. And it's something that we all take seriously as resource managers. And if we can help folks catch a bit more fish based off of some of the skills we have, even if it involves giving up some secret lures or potentially burning a spot, we're willing to do it to help people catch some extra fish.
How strong is the tribalism? I'm a bass guy. I know my side can get a little rowdy, but then you get to look and try to bring on each section in your fishing reports and in your content. And you've seen this being a trout guy. And I know trout guys can be very passionate about what they do. And you must really see that, especially in this office with everyone.
Yeah, but we all like to fish for a variety. I mean, different species. I like to fly fish. If I can get a fish on the fly rod, that's the way I'm going to do it. I'm no purist by any means. I'll fish with a spinning rod. I'll fish with conventional setup. I'll fish with bait. But it's everyone kind of has their own little niche, I guess. Mike's really focused on the bass kind of stuff, but we all enjoy a variety of different species. I think Mike would probably tell you one of his favorite fish is channel catfish.
Oh, channel catfish are fun to catch.
Yeah.
I do enjoy catching channel catfish.
Yeah.
And channel catfish actually underpin a lot of the work that we do in some of the more developed areas to get people out there to fish through our Fish Local Virginia program.
Yeah. But we have, obviously you have, we do different videos, and you have people that have different opinions on different fisheries or different techniques and that kind of stuff. But we try to basically just present out opportunities so that regardless of how you want to approach fishing, you can have success with a variety of different tactics. And that's what we oftentimes try to do. If we're targeting a certain species of fish during a certain time of the year, we'll try to break down tactics for an artificial approach, tactics for a fly rod approach. Hey, if you like fishing with live bait, you can go this route. We've got a video coming out in the next week or two on Sauger.
There's a good setup for the next segment. There we go.
And we actually talk about approaching them with live bait, which is a very effective way to catch Sauger, approaching them with artificial lures, and then even approaching them with a fly rod, which is more challenging.
Since you set it up, go into why the Sauger?
Yeah, so Sauger are actually a really cool fish that we've been managing now for about a decade. I think it started around 2013. And really what Sauger are is they're a hybrid between a walleye, female walleye, and a male Sauger. And a lot of water bodies that we manage, particularly in the northern and eastern part of the state that we manage for walleye. Walleye aren't necessarily native to those resources, but we've managed them as a game fish in those resources for decades. And some of those resources, despite tinkering with the stocking rates and trying to basically create walleye fisheries, the habitat might not necessarily be ideal for a walleye. And we basically, some of these impoundments that we've managed, we've had sort of marginal success with walleye. But when we manage these same fisheries with Sauger, we've had off the chart success from growth rates, survival rates. They tend to do a little bit better in slightly more turbid systems, maybe slightly tolerating slightly more warmer water temperature regimes and that kind of stuff. So really the Sauger fisheries that we're managing are fisheries that had historically been managed as walleye fisheries. And there's only about a half dozen water bodies in the northern and eastern part of the state. Lake Chesdin is one of them. And we're just seeing really good growth rates on these fish.
So over those 10 years, you then had to build out the logistical system. It wasn't just, we're going to start stocking this, and this is something we're going to do, and then it happens. You have to go from that to then creating just the fish hatchery program, developing enough to then, that was what was happening through that whole 10-year plan to get it up to speed.
So actually, it's a really good example of a partnership between our agency and our counterparts over in West Virginia. And West Virginia DNR, they have the Ohio River serves as it's a great Sauger fishery, and it basically serves as basically that source of the Sauger for us for creating a Sauger. Some of our biologists will go over to West Virginia, help out with the sampling. Actually, it's usually around this time of the year. It'll be coming up in a few weeks as we get closer to the spawn, and we'll help out and actually go out and collect reproductively mature Sauger, and then we'll actually extract the milt from the Sauger and travel that back to some of our hatchery systems here, where we can then collect our female walleye, extract the eggs, and then basically create Sauger, the hybrid species there, in a very controlled setting, and then raise those fish to fingerling size, and then stock them into certain water bodies across the state. And what we're seeing with the survival rate is really, really encouraging. And then the growth rate in those certain systems, John Odenkirk talks about what he's seeing on Lake Anna in the video, but seeing 1-year-old fish that are already 12, 13 inches long, which is pretty wild. And fish that are 2 years old that are 16, 17 inches long. So, getting to that, hitting that size limit quickly.
How many fish, I know about the Front Royal getting up and running. How many fish hatcheries are in Virginia when you're talking about the trout stocking, the catfish, now the Sauger? Is it just one massive just Zootopia thing in Central Virginia, or what?
So we have a total of 9, right?
Yes.
5 cold water and 4 warm water.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. All across the state. And considering this is under Mike's purview, I'll let him talk a little bit more about our systems. But we do everything from cold water trout to more temperate species like walleye and striped bass.
Yeah, we have 5 cold water facilities where we grow brook, brown, rainbow, and tiger trout. And we've got 4 warm water facilities where we grow walleye, muskie, striped bass, and Sauger. We actually augment this with fish purchases on things like F1 largemouth bass, hybrid striped bass, channel catfish, because those are species that are not time effective to grow here in Virginia in our hatcheries. The more southeastern regions have a better climate for growing things like largemouth bass or channel catfish. But we can grow plenty of trout, plenty of walleye, and plenty of striped bass. And if it wasn't for the hatchery production of striped bass, we would not have inland striped bass fisheries in Virginia. We would not have a lot of walleye fisheries. You'd still see places like the New River or the Stanton River support a fishery, but the small impoundment walleye fisheries that we have and Sauger fisheries would not exist without the presence of those 4 warm water hatcheries.
So the F1s you purchase, now do you have just a northern strain largemouth that you guys raise to do little bodies of water, or what with that?
So throughout the state, most of our largemouth bass are actually about 50-50 northern largemouth and Florida largemouth, just by the nature of stocking over the years. Basically across the state, that's the distribution we have. You're not going to find pure strain northern or pure strain Florida largemouth anywhere in Virginia. It just doesn't exist. The F1 largemouth bass have been an experiment to see if we can augment the largemouth bass populations in our larger reservoirs by these low-level stockings. And what we found preliminarily has been very encouraging. We're starting to see fish in places like Smith Mountain Lake show up from these stockings. We're able to test them and figure out which ones are actually the first-generation hybrids. And, a lot of the credit tends to go to the genetics. What we found is that because they're stocked at a slightly larger size than they would be naturally at that point, they get a bit of a jump on growth.
Interesting.
So that jump on growth seems to carry through the rest of their lives. So it's basically the equivalent of if they were spawned a little bit earlier and we had a real warm spring.
What size are they usually stocked at?
About that big.
Scientific.
About
you guys
that
can see
big.
it for the camera.
Small ones.
Yeah.
That's-
Fingerling size.
And so then that dropping back into the Sauger. So then if you're going to drop round number 100,000 into Lake Anna, logistically, is that you have to go back 2 to 3 years when you decide to implement that plan of getting things set up for that? Or is that just the year before that we're just going to raise 100,000 and dump it in there? Like how many years does it take to do that?
It's really a year before.
Oh, year. Wow.
So it's our systems are very adaptable. We have some excellent hatchery managers. And the production, so right now we're getting walleye brood stock. We're preparing for this. So
Okay.
The thing would be is they got a request last year for how many walleye they need and how many sauger they need. So what'll happen is they'll get the walleye brood stock, and then we'll probably send Scott over to get sauger milk for the sauger production of it. But they're geared for this. They're well prepared. And they also keep a couple of ponds on like an experimental basis to grow things like red ear sunfish, bluegill, or even crappie in some cases that are stocked. So we've got a lot of resiliency in the system that way because we've got the variety that's there. But on something like striped bass, we'll actually know a year or two out based off of forage availability, i.e. how much food is in there, as well as the numbers that we're seeing. Because on something like striped bass, we have to tune the numbers very carefully to make sure we don't overexploit the forage base and end up with a lot of small striped bass. But we also want to make sure there's enough striped bass in there where folks catch them. And it's all informed on a fairly regular basis, and they're fairly adaptable to about a year out.
And with the striped bass, it's pretty neat. Any inland landlocked water body in the Chesapeake Bay watershed will be Chesapeake Bay strain striped bass. Whereas if you're looking at Smith Mountain Lake, that's Roanoke drainage, right? So we spend a lot of time and effort ensuring the genetic integrity of these various water bodies that we're managing on an inland basis.
And to elaborate on Alex's point, I'm glad you brought that up because we try really hard to adhere to some very high fish health standards. The fish health standards that we have in our hatcheries are above and beyond what you'd expect out of the private sector because we want to make sure that we don't unintentionally spread pathogens out the state. We do what we can to treat them when they come up to and including euthanizing fish to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just part of the way we try to do business there. And with the genetic integrity thing, we're also creative with things like triploid rainbow trout.
Yeah.
So we like to stock triploid rainbow trout where there's the potential that we'd see some interference with native brook trout. Because if you stock triploid rainbow trout, they're sterile, so they can't establish a population in those water bodies. They also have the bonus if they get bigger. So and further on the genetic side of things, we actually do a lot of. I apologize for being a bit scattered on it because this is one of the coolest things.
No, go for it. Like
seven or eight.
I love these conversations. Yeah.
And one of the other really cool ones is with the New River walleye.
Yeah.
So we actively select for New River walleye at our hatcheries for the New River drainage. And it's this really great example of restoring a native population of fish that also just happens to get a little bit bigger than the walleye we'd see. It's a win on so many different levels.
For people that don't know, that are listening, Virginia is so cool because of the New River walleye. Could you touch on that? What makes them so special?
The New River walleye population is genetically distinct from a lot of other walleye populations. It's well adapted to that system, and it also happens to grow just a bit larger than what we'd see with walleye in other areas.
Yeah, a little bit longer growing season down here. And I think the fish benefit a little bit. And there are folks that think the next world record might come out of.
I think
might come out of that. I'm not saying it will or won't, but there's definitely I've heard that debated on some different.
I am trying to get a New River keeper on here because I think the river is freaking fascinating. Is it the second oldest river in the world? Third oldest?
It's ancient.
It's ancient.
You need to talk to Sergeant Wes Billings. He's one of our sergeants in our law division down there. Avid walleye angler. We did a piece with him on Clater Lake last summer, doing the nightcrawler harness, slow trolling kind of deal. Maddeningly frustrating way to fish if you've never done it before. You're just constantly snagged. But once you get the feel right, and you're ticking bottom and you're moving that harness rig up and over structure, it can be a deadly tactic. But he lives and breathes walleye. Fishes for them year round, and he catches some of his biggest fish on the New River in the months of December and January, pre-spawn, and he does a lot of like live line and form and that kind of stuff. But yeah, they catch big fish time of the year in the winter.
The state is so big. I mean, we're here in Richmond, and like the New River feels like it is like forever away.
Yeah,
That's because it is forever away.
But that place is so wild too. I've been there one time, and it's just like a different planet. Like,
and then try getting down to the Clinch or the Holston drainage down to far southwest Virginia. You spend 4.5 hours on I-81, and you're still in Virginia. Yeah. So there's some pretty cool diversity we have.
That's insane. I mean, and getting back to putting a bow on the fisheries, the fish hatcheries, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the smallmouth. And it's probably easier to put a man on the moon, and this is what I've heard, to put a man on the moon than to breed a smallmouth in captivity.
I think it's a little easier than that.
Yeah, but like, I want to pick your brain about that. Like, why set the stage of, is it hard to do it, and why is it hard to do it?
It's complex to do that. It's a bit challenging, whether it's getting broodstock at the right time, managing the pond temperatures at the right time, dealing with kind of encouraging them to spawn and build nests, and how you set that up with raceways versus ponds. Smallmouth are not as adaptable as a largemouth when it comes to spawning conditions. Largemouth will ultimately, in a pond, spawn. They'll find a place to spawn. They'll ultimately will.
Yeah.
Smallmouth aren't like that, which makes it a lot more challenging.
Yeah, a little more finicky in the aquaculture setting.
We're optimistic at Front Royal with the new equipment coming online that we'll be able to crack it a bit better, and we're hoping that we'll be able to stock those fish into some of the river systems and get a positive benefit. I am reasonably confident that we'll be able to get some good production out of there. I'm actually very confident. We've got some great folks working out there. And if we don't succeed, we'll keep trying. We'll work with folks from across the country because there are folks that are effective at growing smallmouth bass and hatcheries. We just haven't had the kind of infrastructure I think we really need in the past.
And that, which species, I'm assuming, like, which species is harder from a financial standpoint to actually grow in the numbers needed to stock, and which ones are, easier?
Well, again, it gets back to what we grow and what we stock. So we stock catchable trout because it's cost effective to grow trout to catchable size here in Virginia. We stock fingerling walleye and striped bass because it's cost effective to grow them out to that size. We know that at that size introduced, they'll actually get into a fishery, establish populations, and they'll do well. It's more cost effective for us to do things like buy channel catfish or F1 largemouth bass, given the climate that we have. We just don't have the growing season for those type of species. And with something like channel catfish in particular, we buy at a catchable size so that our anglers can catch them after they're stocked in there rather than wait for them to grow. So it's kind of an optimization problem, if you will, about climate, cost, angler preferences, what the lakes can support, what the rivers can support. And we've just about optimized it on all of those different species to be cost effective and maximize recreational opportunity.
And we work across state lines all the time with our counterparts in West Virginia, North Carolina. Just, we just put out a piece on some of our muskie collaboration with North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission.
North Carolina has been vital with us having stockable muskie, and the only reason we have northern pike in Virginia is because New Jersey comes up with northern pike quite a bit, has some surplus, and we stock northern pike.
Yeah, that's just like, I don't think anyone I've looked online ever asked that question from the logistical side point of stocking. Like, is the smallmouth going to take more resources to get up and going because it's just a little bit more finicky compared to just trout, compared to catfish? And then when you got this massive state and you do have maybe this lump sum, it's like, okay, we can do the trout very easily, but then it'll take that same amount of resources to do like the F1, and then like how you guys try to figure out a game plan for that. And I think that's just really fascinating because of the logistics that you guys have to do. And because when people look on a map, example, trout, the trout are stocked twice a year. Congratulations. But do you understand the logistics of that have to take place to, like, I don't know, 500,000 trout, like whatever, give or take, something like that?
We
like,
stock about 1 million catchables.
A million. So that you have to raise that. Then you need the vehicles. Then you need to know where you're going to go and the people. And like, I don't think people appreciate the logistical side. All they see is the guy with the net that chuck them in and leave.
There's some great content. Speaking of Jason Hallaker, some great content that you can link as well on what goes into stocking trout in Virginia. And basically the effort that our hatchery staff are dedicated to. And then what goes into basically getting those fish in, because it's more than just pulling up to the edge of a parking lot and putting them in. I mean, we're oftentimes using old logging roads. We've got basically, F-250s, and we're getting back with 4-wheel drive, trying to get these fish as dispersed throughout certain river systems as we can.
Yeah, I didn't even think about native brook trout. Yeah,
There's a great trout stocking video that Jason put together. You'll have to link.
And guys, that'll be linked in the episode description as well. Yeah. And we covered a lot. Like, what did we miss?
All good stuff.
I mean, again, thanks again. And then, do you guys got any non-work related fishing goals this year?
I'm going to try to crack 10 for a largemouth.
Okay.
I think this is the year where I just target trophy fish. I say that every year, and every year, usually around mid-January, I start to get distracted and pick up the spinning rod. But I think this year I'm going to try to crack 10.
Just throw glide baits the whole year.
I got a big topwater bait I like to throw that I'd like to not name specifically. I think I'm going to throw a bit more of that this year.
You still fish tournaments though, right?
I do not.
Really?
I do not. I have not tournament fished since I left the state of Massachusetts.
I don't know. Wow. How does it make you feel? I don't know if I could do that.
To be honest with you, I feel very privileged to do what I do. And to me, not fishing tournaments is not a big deal because I get to show up to work every day and work with a program that really helps to make good recreational opportunities exist. And I have no regrets about giving up tournament fishing to do that. I love coming to work every day. I'm excited. I lose sleep over the problems we have.
So never a Wednesday nighter ever again. Nothing like that.
Not as long as I'm working for the department. I just don't want to be in a situation like that where for me, it's not appropriate for somebody at an administrator level in a fisheries
I didn't
agency.
even think about. So, okay. Gotcha. Okay.
So I'm very cautious about making sure that we stay as above board and appropriate. Because we're all excited about fisheries, but it's also important to maintain a level of transparency and objectivity to manage them properly.
I didn't even think about that. Okay. So if you did, it'd have to be after retiring kind of deal.
I'm planning to retire in a certain date so I can tournament fish in the future, but
that makes sense.
Still
gotcha.
many years off.
No, I didn't even think about that. So yeah. Wow. On to goals. Come on.
One goal of mine is to catch a muskie. Never done it before.
On a fly?
I would love to get one on fly, but I think it'd probably be easier to catch one with conventional equipment first, just to kind of get the first one out of the way and then maybe go for one on the fly. But
did you catch a recent monster brown trout recently? I thought we were talking about that earlier.
I actually, to be honest with you, I didn't do a whole lot of trout fishing last year, which is kind of embarrassing. I was so focused on a lot of other stuff, but it's been, I need to get back on some of the tailwaters this spring.
What's your personal best brown trout? Are you going to try to beat that this year?
I would love to, but it might be a challenge.
How big was that?
Fish out west that was just shy of 30 inches.
Wow.
But right around 28. But yeah, upper North Platte River outside of Saratoga, Wyoming. But that's been about 4 or 5 years now.
I think you said that guide said that was the largest brown trout he'd ever seen.
Yeah.
Well, what's your biggest trout in Virginia?
In Virginia, I've caught some browns on the Jackson tailwater that were right around 22 inches. Lengthwise, didn't weigh them, but they grow bigger than that. There's 2 foot plus wild browns in the Jackson, and then another wild trout fishery that has some really, really big fish would be the South Fork of the Holston River. The stretch near our Bullerfish hatchery has some absolute giants. Those are probably the 2 top places I would recommend going for trophy wild streambred brown trout.
Okay, completely off topic. Have you ever wanted to saltwater fish with a fly? And if so, what would you want to catch?
Oh, I saltwater fish with a fly. That's how I prefer to fish in saltwater, is with a fly rod.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I've done it a lot. One of the most fun fish on a fly rod in saltwater would be false albacore. They're fantastic. They take you into your backing within seconds. I got the chance to do that actually off the coast of Massachusetts. That's been about 6 or 7 years, but that was one of the coolest experiences I've had in saltwater.
That's
with a
so
fly.
freaking cool.
But you can do a lot, even just from the bank down in the eastern portion of the state, on where some of our tidal rivers enter the bay. Puppy drum, speckled trout, striped bass, all these species you can target in the right setting with a fly. So.
We're going to do a separate segment on that, because I don't even know like how you'd even start to get the right tackle for that to tackle.
You scale up. It's a lot of 8 and 9 weight fly rods, depending on the type of water you're fishing. It's a lot of full sinking line, 350 to 450 grain full sinking line. But a lot of our opportunities you can fish in relatively shallow water on the Chesapeake Bay, where you can do a lot of sight fishing, especially for puppy drum in the Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads area, which can be a ton of fun on a fly rod. So, or light tackle for that matter. But
that'll be another Pandora's box for another day.
Lots of good saltwater opportunities.
Michael, Alex, thank you again for having me down here. This has been absolutely wonderful to be able to pick your brain about everything that's going on, especially whether it's our hatcheries, the Alabama bass situation. Is there a phone number? I don't think we mentioned it, but we'll mention again. If someone does catch something that they think is a Alabama bass, is there a phone number they can call, or what should they do?
They should email us at fisheries@dwr.virginia.gov with their contact information, and we'll follow up.
Okay. Awesome.
You could always call our headquarters. It's 804-367-1000. And I'll get you in contact with customer service, and you can ask to speak to fisheries from there. But either technique will get you to us.
Awesome. Good deal. And then, guys, link in the episode description to everything that we just talked about today. If you have any more questions, again, please reach out to me. I'll try to get them answered, or please reach out to these individuals here, and hopefully they can get you what you need. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys next time on Fishing the DMV. Bye.
You're listening to Fishing the DMV with your hosts, Thomas Ahrens and Jared Mounts. Fishing the DMV is brought to you by Jake's Bait and Tackle, located in Winchester, Virginia.
If that doesn't get you jacked up, I don't know what will.